Fallout 4, originally released November of 2015. Available on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox platforms. Retailing for $19.99 for the Standard Edition, or $39.99 for the Game of the Year Edition, which includes all DLC packs. Fallout 4 is an open-world, first-person, role-playing game, taking place in a retro-futuristic world that looks something like if the science fiction of the 1950s then had an apocalypse. Kinda like if Robert Heinlein would have written Mad Max. Unlike any other Fallout game, we actually see something of what the world was like pre-apocalypse. After you create your character, you get a chance to wander about what a modern house would have looked like, seeing your significant other and your robot butler. But after only a few minutes of this, the news announces that the war has started, and you find yourself running off to one of the famous vaults. This leads to your character being cryogenically frozen, only to wake up to witness your significant other dying, and your wee baby being kidnapped. After you thaw out, you find yourself still in the vault, only now it is empty and somewhat run down. Of course, all of this is just glorified tutorial. Once you leave the vault, the game proper starts. 200 years have apparently passed, give or take. The game would very much like you to go back to your old home. Though honestly, there's nothing really forcing you to. You could just pick a direction and go. However, you are in one corner of the map, so your options for directions are a bit limited at this point. From here, though, you have many options of what to do. You could just go out and randomly shoot things. You could enjoy the crafting elements that are in the game, with every weapon and most armors having some manner of customization. In fact, the customization means you won't be switching weapons nearly as often as you usually would in this kind of game, as you start the game finding a 10mm pistol, a Fallout standard. Usually you would fairly quickly upgrade to a different weapon, but because you can so thoroughly customize every weapon, you can make that 10mm pistol much more powerful. Make it better for iron sights aiming, or better for hip firing. Put a silencer on it, or a larger magazine. Eventually, you'll still need to find a more powerful weapon, but you could be fairly far into the game before you do that if you're making the most of customization. You also have the option to do some city building at specific points that are located all across the map, though unlocking places to do the city building in is generally tied to joining one of the factions. It's also fairly rudimentary. And it's also done from a first-person view, so I really only messed with city building when the game forced me to, and once to make like a nice home base for myself at an empty map location. Just a place that had a bunch of containers, all of the various workbenches for crafting. Zero style to me doing this, it was all about making it practical. As I said, doing city building is usually tied to joining one faction or another. The good news is, you're not limited to only joining one faction. You can pretty much join them all. All of them have their own stories, own NPCs, own goals within the game, and can affect the ending depending what you do with them. But unfortunately, a lot of doing any faction is repetitive busy work. So, for example, you join the Minutemen, which the game almost strong-arms you into doing if you follow the intended path. You will get assignments to go help various places where you can do city building on the map. After you help these places, you're then able to do the city building if you're so inclined. But to get the experience from the quest, you have to go report back to the Minutemen. When you report back to them, it's impossible to avoid getting another assignment from them. And no, you don't necessarily have to do a quest you've been assigned, but they're going to be there on your list of stuff to do, clogging up the list. And this is the same for pretty much every faction in the game. The Brotherhood of Steel, the Institute, the Railroad. And I think it was meant to make you feel invested in these various factions, but I just found myself annoyed with all the busy work. But all that busy work is going to lead to you getting a lot of experience. And that experience will cause you to level up over and over again. But unlike other Fallout games, you don't get skill points when you level up in Fallout 4. Every level, you get one perk. You can use the perk in one of two ways. You could take one of your basic stats and increase its value by 1 up to a maximum value of 10. Or you can put the perk into one of the abilities that stat grants you. But the abilities are tied to how much of that stat you have. So let's say you want to be better at picking locks. You need to have a minimum 4 in the perception stat. Putting 1 point into lockpicking means you can now pick Novice and Advanced locks. A second point allows you to pick Expert locks. So this means being able to do anything is going to take several levels, and every skill is also gated by minimum level. So if you want to be able to pick Master locks, the earliest you can possibly do it is at level 18. So I hope you kept a pad and paper with you and kept track of the locations that had master locks that needed picked. The game is not keeping track of that for you. And while it is somewhat annoying that you can't just maximize the stats you use with a few levels, like in previous games, this does lead to a greater sense of progression and getting more powerful. Now as you're exploring this open world, looking for your son and picking locks and hacking computers and shooting dudes, you do have the option of doing this alone. But you also have the option to take an NPC companion with you. And all of the NPC companions have their own quests and stories to do. And they all will like and dislike various actions that you take throughout the game. And they will also be almost entirely a burden to you the entire time you are traveling with them. But you can use them as pack mules to keep all the various things you find at locations and on the dead bodies you'll be generating. For the most part, their stories and quests are actually worthwhile and very interesting. The problem is they aren't great companions. They are rarely useful in combat, with the sole exception of the robot you can get from one of the DLCs. If you're in a confined space, frequently the NPC will stand in your way of getting out of it, and it frequently happens that if you're trying to disarm traps, the NPC will move forward, setting off the trap. And all of that is going to get on your nerves real quick. But the good news is that the NPCs can't actually die. They take too many bullets in combat, they'll just sort of shut down for a minute. You could run over to them and heal them with one of your stim packs, but that'd be a waste of a perfectly good stim pack. The gameplay on offer is by and large pretty good, meaning that Fallout 4 is, overall in my opinion, a good game. The problem is, it's not a good Fallout game. The problem is, it doesn't really understand the Fallout universe as it's previously been established. It also disregards things that have been treated as absolute facts in previous games for no apparent reason. And while I could go on for literal hours about this issue, I just want to give one example of what I mean. So ever since Fallout 1, there has been power armor. In the first game, only the Brotherhood of Steel had it. Various games have added different kinds of power armor and different factions with access to it. It has always been said that a suit of power armor can run for about a century on one cell. Sometimes referred to as a battery, sometimes as a charge. In this game it's referred to as a fusion core. Fair enough. But a fusion core certainly doesn't last a century in this game. No, a fusion core lasts about 20 minutes. And I could have accepted this if this was just a problem with early game suits that you find. As for the first time ever, you'll encounter raiders that have access to power armor. And you could rationalize that these are like jerry-rigged together suits. Because of how they're patchworked together, they're not efficient. But they didn't go that route. They made this the same for all suits of power armor in this game, which further disregard previously established Fallout canon by making all suits of power armor use the same underlying skeleton. In previous games, it was a plot point that various kinds of power armor have different internal structures. Here, there is one generic power armor skeleton that just has armor plates attached to it. I think both of these things were done to balance gameplay and prevent power armor from being an overpowered piece of equipment. And I'll be the first to admit that violating pre-established Fallout canon is something that's only going to bother a very small minority of players, myself included. But it did somewhat sour the experience for me. So is Fallout 4 worth your time and money? Well, it is a Bethesda open-world game. There's literally hundreds of hours of stuff to do, so from that standpoint, it is definitely worth your money. And if you're looking for an open-world game set in a post-apocalyptic setting, this is a pretty good option. But if you're really a Fallout fan, this game is not going to serve you very well. There isn't even a introduction with the voice work of Ron Perlman. So open-world fans, definitely give this one a look for $20. But Fallout fans, just go and replay New Vegas. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.